Good morning, everyone from Rome. And to people who are in other time zones, I wish you a very good afternoon and a good evening. And thank you very much for joining us for this event today. This is the 2-hour live session on overcoming the food security and nutrition roadblocks in social protection responses to COVID-19. And this session is part of the e-conference, Turning the COVID-19 Crisis into an Opportunity, What's Next for Social Protection, hosted, of course, by socialprotection.org. I'd like to introduce the objectives of these sessions. You'll see them in a moment on the next slide. The objectives are to look at what have been some of the obstacles in considering food security and nutrition in the design of social protection responses to COVID. Why does food security and nutrition matter so much to the effectiveness of social protection responses to COVID? And by the way, for social protection responses more generally, and what can be done to address identified roadblocks. Many of our presenters need no introduction. We have very prominent and respected speakers from government and various leading institutions. You can see them listed here, and the institutions represented are on the right-hand side of the screen. And these speakers will be introduced in full as we go through the session today. And together, we will explore how social protection programs and systems can respond to increased levels of vulnerability to hunger and malnutrition, which perpetuate the vicious cycle of poverty experienced, unfortunately, by millions. Now, what is coming up after this session? This session is taking place 10 days before we again are going to commemorate World Food Day, which will be on the 16th of October. And the roundtable that we're having today, we really hope is setting the scene for a very much needed discussion on how we can come together to avert the current global crisis, which is pushing more than 250 million people into chronic hunger. Our intention is to turn we hope that the results of the discussion today, a number of the key messages and the video interventions that have been made will provide really useful fodder for the consideration at the World Food Day sessions that will be and will help in this way, not only to inform those of us who are here today in the next 2 hours listening into this event and those who will watch it virtually later, but that will help contribute to the World Food Day discussions to mobilize and redouble our efforts against chronic hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. I'd like also to acknowledge that there are a number of people who are contributing to this event and the discussion of this topic by video who are not able to be here live as panelists today. These people are listed here. There are many people who wanted to contribute to this event. Again, there's many leading thinkers and voices whose opinions and perspectives on this important topic we want to hear. So although they won't be featured in the next 2 hours, you can go to the landing page for this session that's on socialprotection.org. You'll find a link to a video blog you can see where we've compiled the valuable contributions that we've received. We've received video contributions and in many cases written contributions as well. And it will be possible for you, at your leisure and to go through and hear from the key experts also who were not able to be here with us today. So before I move on to introductions, including of myself, by the way, I just want to note that the Q&A is open. Questions can be posted throughout the event, please using the chat function. Starting now, and as speakers go, you can post in questions on the chat event, and we'll do our best to answer selected questions at the end of all of the interventions, and any questions that we don't have time to answer will be responded to and shared via the socialprotection.org platform. So now on to introductions. My name is Sarah Lawton. I'm the Chief of Social Protection for the World Food Program. And I'll be moderating this session and co-hosting it together with Ms. Lola Castro, who is WFP's Regional Director for Southern Africa. So Lola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and a pleasure to be here today, co-hosting with you, and really pleasure to see this very, very incredible panel that we have today. Hello from Joburg to the world, and really a pleasure to see you all. So let's start this very interesting panel today. Really, we are going to talk about overcoming the food security and nutrition roadblocks in social protection responses to COVID-19. And I have the pleasure to present our first speaker that will be delivering the opening remarks of this important event. And obviously, he needs no introduction. His Majesty Letsi III of the Kingdom of Lesotho is the African Nutrition Champion of the Assembly of African Heads of States. He's also the Special Ambassador for Nutrition of the Food and Agriculture Organization, and also the champion for the Human Capital Project for the World Bank. And on top of it, we know, Your Majesty, you are the symbol of national unity and stability, and a forward-looking figure in so many fronts for both Africa and the globe. So thank you very much, Your Majesty, to join us today. And please, over to you to deliver your opening remarks. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure and honor for me to kickstart these important discussions on overcoming food security and nutrition roadblocks in social protection responses to COVID-19. I'm equally honored and grateful to be joined by Her Excellency Ms. Valerie Guarnieri, WFP's Assistant Executive Director, and Her Excellency Ms. Lola Castro, WFP's Regional Director for Southern Africa region, who are convening this valuable discussion on behalf of the United Nations World Food Programme. As a United Nations Special Ambassador for Nutrition, I am delighted to deliver these opening remarks for this important event that seeks to address the challenges to food and nutrition security in the COVID-19 era and beyond. I have noted with gratitude that this event will be graced by the presence of a lineup of renowned experts that come from all over the world and who will no doubt make valuable and informed interventions and presentations during the course of this session. The roundtable discussion is framed in the context of the Global E-Conference entitled "The COVID-19 Crisis as an Opportunity. What's next for social protection?" which is in celebration of the 5th anniversary of the socialprotection.org Knowledge and Learning Hub, which was founded at the request of the G20 Development Working Group back in 2015. Distinguished participants, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and its far-reaching socio-economic impact, the roundtable session aims to discuss 3 critical and timely questions. What are the roadblocks impeding the ability of social protection responses to tackle the vicious trap of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition? Why should we be concerned about them? and how can we successfully overcome them in order to enhance the catalytic relation between food security, nutrition, and social protection interventions. As the title of the conference indicates, the discussion offers a forum in which we can envisage how to turn the current pandemic into a real opportunity. An opportunity to build and strengthen cross-sectoral and effective coalitions that will work towards elimination of chronic hunger and poverty. Having such an eminent panel of experts at hand fills me with optimism that we will work together, guided by considerable knowledge and experience, to deal with the challenges that we face in relation to nutrition and food security. The complexity of poverty and hunger as social problems makes multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder coalitions a necessity. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it unprecedented socio-economic challenges that compel us to work together even closer than before. The impact of COVID-19 on economies and health systems globally has been drastic and all-encompassing. While containment measures have saved lives, they have also triggered economic recessions and severe impacts on communities and individuals. We are now faced with urban hunger and vulnerabilities which we have always known existed, but we were not well prepared to address. In some countries, the pandemic has added yet another layer of suffering and complexity to existing and long-standing crises, worsening the prevalence of hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. The number of people affected by hunger has gradually risen since 2014. Most gains of the past years in relation to nutrition and food security have been reversed. It is obvious that nations of the world will need to redouble their efforts in order to achieve the zero hunger goal by 2030. The situation remains dire. An estimated 690 million people in the world are hungry, an increase of almost 60 million people over a period of 5 years. WFP estimates that in the 79 countries where it works, the number of acutely food insecure people could increase by 80%, from 149 million during the pre-COVID-19 period to over 250 million by the end of 2020. Every low and middle income country faces this challenge. Bringing it closer home in the Southern African region where I come from, the COVID-19 crisis alone is likely to reverse the gains made towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has exacerbated the situation that was already precarious. Food insecurity in my region was already alarmingly high, even prior to COVID-19 pandemic, with a record of 45 million food insecure people. Despite these daunting challenges, we have seen how countries have reacted to buffer the impacts of this unprecedented crisis by strengthening social protection systems and interventions to reach those in need. In a period of just over 6 months since the beginning of the pandemic, a significant number of countries have planned or put in place over 1,000 social protection measures in response to the socio-economic impact of the pandemic. The increase in social protection spending is expected to exceed the level of expenditure that occurred as part of the global response to the 2008 recession. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has brought to the fore the importance of social protection systems to shield the population against not only the health crisis, but also against hunger and malnutrition. While measures to contain the virus are put in place around the globe, there are people who are more concerned about dying from poverty and hunger than from the virus itself. The inability of members of the community to meet their food and nutrition needs also compromises their immunity and ability to fight and defeat the virus. This crisis has opened our eyes to see those members of society who have been excluded from our social protection systems. This necessitates that new and innovative ways be established to extend adequate and holistic protection to previously unreached areas. This underscores the importance of putting food security and nutrition at the center of social protection efforts. We need to make social protection systems work for food security and nutrition as we foster synergies across sectors, policies and programs to bring about human capital development and meaningful change to our societies at large. Let me emphasize this point further by quoting studies developed and launched by the World Food Programme and the Economic Policy and Research Institute in my country and region, where they say, and I quote, "An appropriate social protection strategy needs to recognize the essential role food security and nutrition play in building a prosperous society able to nourish all its people, and for which nutrition is the foundation of the capabilities that sustain this prosperity over time." End of quote. I implore all participants at this event to reflect on this vision as you embark on and continue this conversation in your organizations, countries, and communities. A conversation that can lead us to finding the innovative and homegrown sustainable solutions to outroot hunger and deprivation within our lifetimes. In conclusion, I thank you most sincerely for your commitment and dedication to make this a better world for all. I now leave you to a productive and invigorating discussion that comes 10 days ahead of what will certainly be an unusual World Food Day. It is my expectation that the key outcomes of this important session will inspire decisive action by governments all around the globe in relation to food security and nutrition. I thank you all and wish you fruitful deliberations.
Thank you, Your Majesty, for these very important opening remarks to launch our conference today. And really, we have seen and we have heard from you the global perspective, and also you have grounded it in Southern Africa, the situation of food insecurity and undernutrition, and the effects that it has had in this region, especially in the last month. So let's launch the panelists today, and let's remember that we have 3 questions we are replying in this panel. And let me just go through them very rapidly so that we are all focused. The first question that we want to reply today is, what are the roadblocks impeding social protection response's ability to tackle the vicious trap posed by poverty, hunger, and malnutrition? That's the first one. Second one, we will hear from our esteemed panelists, why are these roadblocks relevant and hindering the effectiveness of social protection responsive to COVID-19? And the third one will be, how can we overcome these roadblocks? So we are going to find solutions today and redirect our efforts to ensure better social protection responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and limit negative impacts on food security and nutrition. So this is where we're going. And without further ado, I want just to remind our panelists that each one of you have 8 minutes. So thank you very much for respecting those. And let me first introduce our first panelist, Dr. Ergogi Tesfaye. Welcome. You are, and let me present you first, the Minister of Labor and Social Affairs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. And let me tell you that Dr. Ergogi Tesfaye's career path has led her to many various experiences covering a wide range of topics that go from social anthropology, conflict resolution, and gender. Throughout her work, she kept a strong connection with the local communities and a focus on how to help the community and promote especially women's empowerment. Your Honorable Minister, we are so delighted to have you here today as panelists. So over to you to do your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, moderator. Greetings to you all. This is really a great honor to me to be here. Let me just begin before moving to the roadblocks, just to give you an insight. Let me say a few words. The government of Ethiopia has endorsed the National Social Protection Policy Framework in 2014 and start working on the implementation strategy since 2016 to address progressively growing social protection system in the country. In this regard, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs has been just working together with different government and development partners to establish and strengthen the Ethiopian social protection system, and having especially the big flagship project, which is the Urban and Rural Safety Net Program, currently implementing in realization of the social protection in Ethiopia. Coming to the first question, what are the roadblocks impeding the social protection responses. The first one is in Ethiopia, we know that we do have a large number of population in the informal economy. So that this population, especially in the informal economy, has a very little contributory, or we can say that non-contributory based social protection coverage. So we got this as a big roadblock for ensuring social protection in the country. And the other one is the continuous population growth. Currently, Ethiopia has estimated like more than 110 million population size, so that we can see it's increasing tremendously. So we demand for employment for this population, and the kind or in cash support social assistance is very important. So the population size is becoming also a roadblock. And the third one is there is a high rural-urban migration with low knowledge and skill that cover out-limited urban economic and social services. Likewise, there is a high urban youth unemployment at national level. So the the unemployment and this migration in one or another, it affects the social protection system that we do have. And the fourth one is the absence of national digital ID, specific to Social Security digital ID for program management and monitoring and evaluation. And the fifth one is the high malnutrition measured in terms of wasting and stunting, common in especially rural areas. For this, we do have different programs. The one is Sakota Declaration and the other one is Warada Transformation, but still the limited resources that we do have, especially not having adequate food in such areas, and limitation of awareness is also a big challenge. And the sixth one is the limitation in strong coordination among us, the government sectors and other partners is also a roadblock. On top of that, as we are now currently in the COVID pandemic, so this COVID pandemic also has brought us another challenge and become a roadblock. So these are the points that I just would love to address in the first question. If it is allowed, I may just pass to the second one. The second one is, why are these roadblocks relevant, hindering the effectiveness of social protection response to COVID-19? As we all know, especially this COVID time is a very challenging time, but it also gives us a great opportunity to look into the social security system that we do have at national level. When I say this, honestly speaking, though COVID is a roadblock for national social protection, but it helped us to look into our national social protection policy comprehensively and to look into the 5 important pillars to address them accordingly. And secondly, it's become a wake-up call for us to look into preparing a risk mitigation plan at national level. And it also helped to strengthen the weak social mobilization fabrics so that we can we able to mobilize societies to help each other. There was one initiative which was led by His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister, which says sharing the plate, so that every part of the society, individuals, groups have been able to mobilize to fund resources and to share their plates to others. So it also gives us another opportunity to look into how we can mobilize the whole community, the whole society. And the other one is, it also helped us to look out of the window and think of different programs. For instance, we are able to establish food banking so that we could address a number of households. And the other one is, it also helped to look into the impact of irregular migration. As you might have heard, there are a huge and massive number of returnees from the Middle East countries who irregularly migrated. So this also gives us to look into the challenge of irregular migration and to look into possible interventions to be designed. Coming to the third one, how we can overcome these road blocks and redirect our efforts to ensure better social protection responsibilities to COVID-19 pandemic. The very first one is establishing system. Unless we able to establish a national or worldwide system ahead, it's going to be a very challenging one. I don't think that the COVID-19 will be over very soon. We'll be living together with its challenge for a while. So there has to be a mechanism, there has to be a system in place that could help us to ensure food security, nutrition, and social protection as well. So I suggest to have early warning system at national level. We are also working on that one to promote social protection. And the second one, we need to also have a system in emergency recovery mechanisms. So in placing such system will help us a lot, especially in the emergency recovery system. Especially COVID has brought an impact on jobs. Lots of jobs are not there, as we know, at global level, so that it helps us to secure jobs if we do have emergency recovery system. And the other one is strengthening flagship programs in social protection that we do have that ensures also food security in the society. And digitalization is very important. For instance, now we are having a meeting using internet or webinars. So digitalizing the social protection, especially in the era of COVID, is very important. That will support us to reach out our societies accordingly. And establishing National Council for Social Protection and National Fund for Social Protection is very important. Now, as a government of Ethiopia and the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, we are working relentlessly to establish National Council for Social Protection. And the proclamation is already sent to the Ministerial Cabinet, and it's going to be approved very soon. So if we do have such a kind of system, I think we can combat the challenge and the roadblocks. And the other one is school feeding. That has to continue. Now, in many countries, we are opening schools so that we need to think of a program like school feeding. And we need to also have a strong monitoring and evaluation system that supports community-based child protection activities like the food bank for families in need, child care centers, and voluntary safe houses as well. And creating public mobilization is also very important. I'm done with my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, Honorable Minister. That was a very, very clear and detailed presentation. Appreciate it very much. And for the sake of time, apologies to go a little bit in. And for all the panelists, when you see us coming in video, either Sarah or me, we're giving you the signal that that's it. So if you can wrap up when you see us, that will be excellent. Thanks a lot. And to make it easier, Honorable Minister, thank you very much. Let me go to the next panelist, Professor Richard Nkandawire. Welcome, Masuka Bwanji. Professor Richard Nkandawire is a socioeconomist and a rural development expert, and he's currently the chairperson of the National Planning Commission in Malawi. Prior to this position, Professor Nkandawire was senior advisor to the New Partnerships for Africa's Development, NEPAD, and where he was the principal architect in the design of the well-known CAADP. Professor Nkandawire, we're really happy to have you today, and over to you for your presentation, and we'll follow your points. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Laura Castro, honorable ministers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Malawi is certainly very honored in joining this high-level panel session on overcoming food security and nutrition roadblocks in social protection responses to COVID-19. Malawi, as you may all know, has achieved a remarkable progress in social protection over the past 15 years. And some of the progress includes the harmonization approaches that have been put in place to social protection. There are three key programs being rolled out. The government is deploying key systems, a social registry that will facilitate a stronger and more integrated social protection sector. However, like many poor resourced countries, needs consistently are greater than the coverage of interventions. Some of the key social protection programs include school feeding program that covers 50% of schools, the public works program, which is reaching to around 10,000 households, and social cash transfer program, which targets 28% of eligible beneficiaries. There's currently no coverage in urban areas, although there's a move towards addressing this in the wake of COVID-19. I think in spite of these improvements, which I have highlighted, each year Malawi still registers emergency food needs amounting to 1 to 2 million people. In most years, the need predictably is registered over the lean years, and these lean years are from around November to about February every year. So many households are food insecure at this particular period. I think these needs are expected to further increase due to the climate change as well as a COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, 20.2% of the population lived below the poverty, ultra poverty line, while 51.5% lived below the national poverty line. A study from the International Food Research Institute estimates that the short-term impact of COVID-19 on the Malawian economy will include 1.1 million people, primarily in rural areas, temporarily falling into poverty and food insecurity, with urban households suffering the largest income losses. Let me hasten to highlight a few of the social protection challenges that Malawi is confronted with. The first one, I think as most of us are aware, is always this question of unsustainability of financing. Social protection and emergency sectors are quite heavily funded through external funding. And I think this is important that we all confront this challenge. This reduces government ownership, as we all know, and any possibilities of increasing predictable coverage to the most poor, food insecure households. This is an issue that I think all UN agencies will need, I think, to continuously explore. How do you really begin to convince governments to really see this as part of their own commitments. And in the face of COVID-19, Malawi is faced with the challenge of responding to social protection of vulnerable urban and peri-urban populations. And I think the government is beginning to see that, now is their responsibility to step in and begin to respond to these urban and peri-urban areas where social protection interventions have been rather limited. This, therefore, has meant that the country has had to innovate in combining expertise from social protection and emergency to design an intervention that makes sense in an urban setting. And I think all of us are beginning to learn some lessons from those social protection measures we have actually, been running within a rural setting. Right now in 2020, Malawi is confronted with the compounding shocks, one including a health economic shock and also a climate shock over the lean season, again, between November and February. Compounding shocks adds complexity to response plan to ensure food and nutrition needs are met. There's also the challenge of lack of financing structure, which also means uncertainty for households. The impact of COVID-19 will likely last for years, where shock-sensitive social protection and the coming together of social protection and humanitarian intervention is making excellent progress. Without a robust financial framework, there is a risk of households being temporarily supported and not transitioning onto longer-term support. How then can we move forward to have more effective social protection responses as a country? The Zero Hunger and Malnutrition Strategic Review conducted in 2018 noted that 5 key areas need to be addressed. These included the challenge of targeting across social protection and humanitarian responses to ensure that no one is left behind. The government has brought together social protection and emergency and shock responsive social protection to link the sectors to better help households prepare for, manage, and respond to shocks, while also using key data to start adjusting key programs to better cover needs routinely. The Public Works Program has been redesigned to focus on climate smart interventions to help reduce response and exposure to shocks and boost agriculture productivity. Each year, the social protection system is routinely linked to the emergency to ensure the response is based on our core systems and reaching the most vulnerable. There's need to continue to invest in social protection. A stronger social protection system is a critical way of both reducing exposure to hunger, but also enabling fast responses when crisis hits. Increasing the regular coverage, adequacy, comprehensiveness of social protection of those who are structurally poor and supporting households to build productive assets to reduce future shocks needs are key tools for breaking the cycle of food insecurity and protecting development gains. Increasing coverage of key programs, for example, reaching the government's ambition of universal school feeding is critical for buffering households against food insecurity whilst achieving other developmental goals. As the country moves towards focusing on urban areas, there's need to build up the systems for the future. Indeed, in the wake of COVID-19, Malawi is now designing an emergency cash intervention to be delivered by adapting the social protection system to urban areas. Once the intervention is done, it will leave behind a social protection system to be based and to be used for future interventions. Currently, this targeting of urban vulnerable groups is targeting approximately 800,000 people across 4 cities, 35% of each city. It covers the food insecure population identified by government in the recent Malawi Vulnerability Assessment Report. Each household will receive around 35,000 Malawi kwacha to replace lost income due to COVID-19.
Thank you.
This is being implemented by the Malawi government. Let me conclude by actually saying that more fundamentally, I think it is critical that the government begins to develop a robust social protection system with sustainable financing at the coverage and adequacy required to address food and nutrition needs for most vulnerable populations that takes the long-term views, the long-term view. And it's in this regard that we're in discussions with WFP to look at how we can begin to plan for the long term within the context of the new vision that is emerging, Vision 2063 of Malawi. And more importantly, I think there's need for engaging governments on a constant level to ensure that there's commitment of resources to addressing social protection, particularly now that the government has woken up to the reality that the urban population too needs to be addressed in terms of their vulnerability in the wake of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mkandawire, for those excellent and again, very clear thoughts. As our next speaker, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And he's also, importantly, the winner of the 2018 World Food Prize, which is the foremost international award recognizing the achievements and contributions of individuals to human development, particularly to quality, quantity, and availability of food worldwide. So very relevant profile, and thank you so much for joining us. Before joining GAIN, Dr. Haddad was the founding co-chair and the lead author of the Global Nutrition Report. He was also the director of the Institute of Development Studies and the research director at IFPRI. Dr. Haddad, a great pleasure to have you here today. In terms of timing, I'll do the same and turn my video on after 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here, and my congratulations to the organizers, World Food Programme, IDS, NEPAD, and FAO, because I think you've assembled a fantastic panel, and you've also organized this around 3 really clear and crisp exam questions. I'm going to do my best to answer them. This is a particularly important issue for GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, because our goal is to improve the consumption of safe, nutritious food, and that means more availability, more accessibility and affordability, and greater desirability. And my friends at the World Bank tell me that at no time has there ever been this many people enrolled in social protection programs. It was growing even before COVID-19, and that's increased the roles of people who are on social protection programs. And of course, social protection programs are, at least in theory and often in practice, a big boost to demand. Income and demand. And so the potential is there to link social protection programs with an increased availability and affordability of nutritious food. So that's the challenge. So I've been thinking about the 3 questions you posed us, and I've organized them into 3 types of roadblocks. There's a design set of roadblocks, a financial set of roadblocks, and an operational set of roadblocks. So let me start with the design set. So first of all, design, what are the roadblocks to impeding social protection efforts to tackle nutrition? Well, most social protection programs focus on staple foods. They're obviously very important for calories and for averting hunger and the worst forms of malnutrition, but they're not very rich in micronutrients and high quality proteins. Second problem is behavior change is very difficult in times of crisis. The best social protection programs from a nutrition perspective offer an income boost, but also a behavior change intervention, which helps direct that additional income towards nutrition. And I think the third big roadblock in the design side is the links to any businesses. If you want to use social protection as a boost to local business, smallholder farmers, small, medium enterprises, businesses are in a very tough place in COVID-19 because of the collapse of demand. So I think those are three big challenges, and how to overcome them on the design side. I think that the most basic thing is to make sure that every staple food that enters into a social protection program is fortified with iron, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A. This is kind of it seems to me, a no regrets kind of thing to do. Either it's large scale industrial fortification or biofortification. I think the second thing to do is to try to introduce non-staples. It's difficult to do that. I'm thinking about things like pulses, nuts, if possible, eggs and some dairy. It's difficult to do this, fruits, vegetables. It's difficult to do this, but I think it should be part of an initiative to build forward better, not build back better, because that implies you're just going to go back to what you were doing, but building forward better. So this is the opportunity to rethink social protection programs and think about how they can be a boost to nutritious food consumption, not just a boost to staple food consumption. I think that the other ways to overcome these design barriers, really develop engaging nutrition campaigns, public health campaigns, and link them to COVID. I mean, people are very aware of the need to reduce infection and to minimize and mitigate the symptoms of COVID. So, link nutrition and nutritious food messages to the things that that are very uppermost in people's minds at the moment. And then finally, I think it's very important, and the World Food Programme has actually been a pioneer in this, is to link small and medium and enterprises that produce nutritious foods and link to networks like the Sun Business Network. Herta Verberg is here, this is the coordinator of the Sun movement. I'm on the executive committee of Sun. Link social protection programs and the income boosts that are generated, and see if we can generate spillovers to small and medium enterprises that produce, market, distribute nutritious foods. So the second set of roadblocks are financial. I don't have too much to say here. Obviously, nationwide expansion is demanded from the COVID-19 pandemic, which spares no geography. But the problem is that the nationwide expansion needs to be financed at a time when resources are the shortest. So this is a really big problem. Scale up of social protection programs requires resources. How do we overcome that? Well, that's not easy. I think the first thing to do is to remind people in the social protection sphere, ministers of finance, ministers of planning, about if you focus your social protection programs, as Ethiopia has done so brilliantly, on kids in the first 1,000 days of life, the benefit cost ratios are through the roof. They're 16:1 at a median level, and for half the countries for which we have estimates, and we have estimates for about 50 countries, high burden countries, half of those, the benefit cost ratios are way above 16. So remind people who are investing in social protection programs that you can increase the benefit cost ratios by focusing those on averting and preventing malnutrition in the very youngest. I think it's important to redirect domestic funds, government funds, into a building forward better effort. So when everything's very fluid in times of crisis, again, think about building forward better and think about using social protection programs, again, as the government of Ethiopia has done so well, to build assets that are going to help promote growth, but also promote resilience to future shocks. And finally, be investor ready. Be investor ready for foreign assistance. Foreign assistance will come. It may not come as fast as we want, but it will come. And when it comes, have your ducks lined up. Get ready to be ready to scale up your social protection program. Convince your potential foreign assistance investor. Remember, foreign assistance is scarce and it has many alternative uses. So there's a lot of competition for it. Make sure you're ready to, you have a plan to scale up and use it. And the final set of, I think, roadblocks are operational. Very often we don't have the data we need for geographic targeting. You know, one of the things that many countries are doing is they're realizing that COVID rates are different. Infection rates, reproduction rates, they're different in different parts of the country. And to be able to target social protection properly, we need really good data on geographic targeting. But very often it's not sufficiently real time. It's old by the time we get it. Conditionality can also be a roadblock. The most obvious example is school attendance. You can only get school meals if you go to school. That's a roadblock when you can't go to school. Pickups, many social protection programs that are not cash-based, that are commodity-based, rely on pickups, and pickups and delivery points are high population density points and therefore have the potential for infection. So how do we overcome those? Well, I think a lot more creativity on the digital data collection front. Everyone has a smartphone pretty much, or everyone has access to a smartphone or even a non-smartphone. There are ways of thinking about everybody with a smartphone as a potential enumerator. So think about ways, and there are many startups out there that are doing this, think about ways to generate real-time data on missed meals, food prices, diet diversity through smartphones, and that will give you a good sense of where in the geography we need to scale up and scale down social protection programs. Drop conditionality temporarily, or maybe even permanently. In the UK, where I live, free school meals are being delivered to kids even though they don't go to school, because there's a realization that the delivery of free school meals to kids, when kids are out of school, that's when their diets deteriorate, that's when learning becomes really difficult, and good nutritious food helps learning and helps maintain diet quality, especially for those in the most vulnerable settings where obesity in middle income and high income countries, and even some low income contexts, obesity can rise. And then finally, in any social protection programs that require delivery or pickup points for commodities, make sure you have protocols in place to minimize the risk of infection and exposure to the virus. Get PPE equipment, personal protective equipment, in place at the right time and make it affordable to everybody. There are protocols that we're developing to keep food markets open that could easily be used to keep delivery points open for social protection programs. And then my final comment, Chair, is from my good friend David Nabarro. You know, I think all of these roadblocks are we're eminently able to overcome these roadblocks. We just have to be creative and think hard and then act decisively. My friend David Nabarro always says, you know, if the virus is the enemy, people are the solution. So I leave it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Haddad. Those were very thought-provoking and also concrete priorities and recommendations based on your long experience. Thank you for sharing those. As our next panelist, I'd like to introduce Professor Stephen Devra, who's the founding co-director of the Center for Social Protection and a professor at the Institute of Development Studies. He's a development economist who works on food security and social protection, mainly in East and Southern Africa, although not only, of course. Professor Devra, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this interesting and important session. As we know, social protection systems have grown exponentially across the world in the last 20 years. Much of this expansion has been driven by evidence that well-designed social protection programs have positive impacts on indicators of food insecurity, such as food consumption, meals per day, and dietary diversity. However, we have also observed a paradox. Improvements in household food security do not always translate into improvements in individual nutrition status. In South Africa, for instance, since the introduction in 1998 of the Child Support Grant, which now delivers cash transfers every month to 12 million children, which is 2/3 of all children in the country, self-reported hunger has halved from 27% to 13%. But child stunting rates have remained unchanged since the 1980s at 25%. What are the roadblocks that explain this paradox? One roadblock is inadequacy of social protection payments. We talk a lot about the low coverage of social protection, meaning that everyone should have access to social protection when they need it, but not everyone does. But the second dimension of social protection, namely adequacy, is just as important. Is the support provided to people enough? If not, then a person who receives social assistance could still be food insecure and malnourished. For example, cash transfers finance purchases of food, and this might be enough to alleviate hunger. But a nutritious diet costs more than stomach-filling carbohydrates, highly processed foods, and unhealthy fast foods. Also, cash transfers that are intended to be spent only on the labeled child or older person, the person who receives the grant in other words, are inevitably diluted among other family members and are also spent on non-food needs. Another roadblock arises from placing excessive expectations on social protection. Cash transfers address one pathway to food security and nutrition by boosting household purchasing power to buy food. But cash transfers have little or no impact on the other pathways to good nutrition, such as access to clean water, hygienic sanitation practices, and mothers' education about nutritious diets and the importance of exclusive breastfeeding of infants up to 6 months of age. So reducing malnutrition requires an integrated, comprehensive, multi-sectoral strategy, of which social protection is only one component. Strong linkages from social protection to other services are vital. We need to pay more attention to these roadblocks because they limit the potential of social protection to achieve maximum impacts on food insecurity and malnutrition. So what have we learned from COVID-19? One lesson is that social protection systems, especially in low-income countries, have significant gaps that COVID-19 is helping to expose. One of these gaps is geographic. Social protection schemes in Africa, such as food aid and community-based public works programs, were often set up in response to food crisis and chronic food insecurity in rural areas. But the lockdown that forced millions of working adults to stay home for several months this year affected urban workers more than rural farmers, and in many countries there was no safety net for urban households. Another gap is demographic. Social protection that targets non-working groups, such as children and older persons or persons with disability, overlooks the vulnerability of adults who are unemployed either temporarily or long-term, as well as low-income workers in the informal sector, who have no access to unemployment insurance and other social security benefits. Some innovative mechanisms were introduced to fill these social protection gaps. In Ethiopia, for instance, an urban productive safety net program was launched a few years ago to complement the much larger rural productive safety net program. Both programs were used to deliver support in response to COVID-19. In rural areas, participants on PSNP Public Works continued receiving payments even after their projects were closed under lockdown and social distancing regulations. In urban areas, a cash top-up was paid to all direct support beneficiaries to protect their access to food and basic needs at a time when they had lost their income and food prices were rising fast. Another example of existing social protection measures being adapted in order to meet the needs of COVID-19 is school feeding or school meals programs. In several African countries, including Botswana, Cabo Verde, Congo, Liberia, South Africa, and Sudan, schools were closed during COVID-19 lockdowns, but food was delivered to children's homes instead, following World Food Programme guidelines on so-called school feeding at home. While the intention was to ensure that children continued enjoying a nutritious diet until schools reopen, lessons have been learned about how to do this better in future. In Botswana, for instance, the amount of food provided was not enough because it was shared among family members, and the nutritional quality was limited because no meat, fruit, or vegetables were included. To conclude, COVID-19 has highlighted both the potential of social protection to enhance food security and nutrition and its limitations. However, the need to expand both coverage and adequacy and to strengthen social protection systems has never been clearer or more widely accepted. The opportunity to turn the crisis into an opportunity must be taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Devereaux. And let me pass the word to Dr. Michael Sampson, just to present to Dr. Michael Sampson. He's the research director of the EPRI, or Economy Policy Research Institute, a global research institute based in Cape Town, South Africa. And World Food Program, in fact, in our region and globally, we have been working with EPRI in the region effectively for several years in a number of activities. And I want to mention today that we have also been cooperating with EPRI on the development of 2 studies in the region, one of which we're launching today in the form of a COVID-19 policy brief. And this one is titled, and I'm sure Dr. Michael Sampson will mention it, Why Does Food Security and Nutrition Matter in Social Protection Responses to Systemic Shocks in the Southern Africa region? So Dr. Michael Sampson, please, over to you.
The main roadblock tackling social protection's ability to address malnutrition and hunger and food insecurity is, in a word, complexity. Malnutrition poses a new math problem. 9 minus 1 equals, well, maybe not 0, but nothing close to 8. The new math creates one of the main roadblocks impeding social protection's ability to tackle the vicious trap posed by malnutrition. Improving nutritional outcomes requires a complex interaction of multi-sectoral interventions. Each sector plays an essential role in achieving impact. Any breakdown in up to 9 systems, food security, nutrition, health, education, livelihoods, social protection, care practices, water, sanitation, any breakdown leads to a disproportionate impact, exacerbating malnutrition. These sectoral contributions are not additive, they're complementary. Complexity creates a hazardous policy environment where if policy initiatives are not sufficiently integrated, they can break down and become far less effective. This complexity confounds governments in their development strategies to achieve a prosperous and well-nourished society that's able to nurture inclusive social development and the equitable economic growth that sustains prosperity. Nutrition, this foundation of cognitive capital, of the essential capabilities societies require to build and sustain their prosperity, this requires an integrated and comprehensive strategy that can build developmental synergies. This complexity creates an opportunity for virtuous circles, but also vicious traps. Implementing integrated and comprehensive systems, these face roadblocks in the best of times. During a pandemic, the challenges multiply. Crisis and uncertainty can paralyze the actions required for an effective response. Health systems can be overwhelmed, crowding out resources for nutrition programs. School closures can block children from meals programs, often the only nutritious meal they get in a day. Supply chain disruptions and shocks to livelihoods can undermine food security. A single breakdown can compromise the complex math required for the synergies to tackle malnutrition. COVID-19 threatens many of these simultaneously. COVID-19 crisis is also accelerating the fiscal shocks, which create the barriers for the innovation required to build these systems. And these fiscal shocks limit resources, and they intensify both the rivalries across and within organizations that are working to tackle malnutrition. Now, what can governments do? They need to build better the intersectoral and intersectoral connections that build the synergies that improve nutritional outcomes. This is necessary in the best of times. During a pandemic, it's more important than ever. A unified, intersectoral, and cross-organizational approach significantly raises the returns to nutrition investments. This fortifies the political will for expanding resources and enabling organizations to overcome these rivalry-related barriers. We see evidence in Ethiopia, in hundreds of woredas, in a study we're publishing right now, that when the districts integrate their investments in health and education and gender and water and sanitation, they're able to effectively achieve nutritional outcomes. What's interesting is that single sector investments, investing in schools to improve an educational outcome, or investing in health centers to reduce child mortality, these had relatively low returns. But intersectoral investments, investing in health to improve educational outcomes, or comprehensive multi-sectoral investments to improve nutrition, these had outstanding returns. What can we do? Well, three things. Governments can build and strengthen national coordination institutions that integrate intersectoral investments. They can build the legal frameworks and provide the financial resources to make sure they can be effective. And where these institutions work in a decentralized environment, they need local capacity as well. And they need to be responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of these programs across the country for both government programs and non-governmental programs. Development partners can play a vital role. They can create incentives for organizations to work more closely together. They can strengthen the influence and the effectiveness of their resources by channeling them through this coordinating institution. And researchers and policy analysts, they can continue to build the evidence base that both maps a clear road forward and helps to motivate the political will required for the challenge. This evidence base should build on the innovations and evaluation that support iterative problem-solving approaches that are well suited for these kinds of complex challenges and for ensuring relevance to the local context, helping this evidence to make a real impact.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sampson. I think we're all going to remember the new math. 9 minus 1 is not 8. Oh, and by the way, let me just take this opportunity to mention that the policy brief that Lola mentioned in her introduction of Michael Sampson is posted in the chat. This is the policy brief that's just out. I think it's perhaps being just launched today on social protection, food security, and nutrition in Southern Africa. So anyone who likes can refer to that. So I am very happy now to introduce as our next panelist, Dr. Purnima Menon. And Dr. Menon is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute and is also the theme leader for the South Asia Nutrition Programs. And she directs an initiative called Partnerships and Opportunities to Strengthen and Harmonize Actions for Nutrition, which is an initiative to support more use of evidence for nutrition in India. Dr. Menon, there's a lot of interest already. I know you'll have some important points to share with us. Welcome to this conference, and you have the floor, please.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much to WFP and all of you for having me here. So before I get to the roadblocks, I just want to offer a couple of reflections. So I think what has been most striking for us, those of us who work and do research on food security and nutrition, is that what we have seen unfolding in country after country, rich or poor, is that the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic have been quite dramatic. Jobs have been lost, income insecurity is rising, and hunger is rising too. We've seen reports from the US and of course, closer to where I live and work, from South Asia, of what these consequences are like. So for example, across a range of surveys in India, right around the time of the lockdown, there was data suggesting that more than half of households surveyed had cut back on food consumption. In Bangladesh, a survey in April this year highlighted losses of incomes of more than 70% and drops in food expenditure of a third, 35 to 50% drops in reduced food consumption. Now, I'm a researcher, so evidence will play strongly in the roadblocks that I speak to, but I'm going to say right away, right now, we don't know enough over time and across populations of how this is playing out and how it has played out over the past several months. Now, as someone who works in maternal and child nutrition, hearing about these economic and hunger shocks really takes me back to graduate school, where I first learned about the Dutch famine during World War II and the implications of what that meant for the children who were conceived, carried, and born through that time period. But I'm heartened by the fact that today we know more than we did then, particularly about the role of social protection, which I think is just a tremendously powerful tool to support the families and communities that are affected by the economic devastation of this pandemic. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that over the 6-month period that we've been watching this, several health and nutrition programs have come back online, certainly in the geographies that we're working in. We've also seen a slew of social protection measures that came into being pretty quickly after the pandemic lockdowns and the other actions unfolded. And I want to take a pause to sort of applaud the governments and the donors and everybody who sort of put their back into that. But I have to say, again, as a researcher and someone who wants the data to help us figure out, where we take this, I'm really worried that we don't know enough. And so for me, one of the big roadblocks here is whether we have the data. I don't mean impact evaluations, and I don't mean anything other than sort of very basic data on what is going on with social protection. So I really like what Professor Devereux spoke about in terms of, the adequacy and the reach and, those kinds of things around the programs. And I think we're still struggling with that. So let me talk about sort of a few of the difficult questions that I think will become the roadblocks to the effectiveness of social protection. And emphasize throughout and in my closing about the importance of sort of innovations around data to get us to that. So for me, the first difficult question, which I think is a very big roadblock to impact, is whether the social protection programs that have been put in place are reaching the most vulnerable families and communities. And equity is so important, particularly now. And data to inform us about the equity of the reach of programs is really essential to know whether this is working the way we intend for it to be working. Second, I work in maternal and child nutrition. We've sort of really reached consensus on critical age groups that, where we want to protect families and protect the growth of, infants and young children. And so from a nutrition lens, we must also know whether these programs are reaching these 1,000-day households together. So our social protection programs, cash food, and these health nutrition programs sort of converging on households at the right time in those critical 1,000 days. And that requires both administrative design and program monitoring to work very well. So we've seen, for example, even in our pre-COVID work in India, that even cash transfers that are targeted to that age group can suffer from implementation challenges that delay payments and reduce coverage and reach and sort of full-scale convergence. A third roadblock relates to this issue of adequacy. And I think we know so little about adequacy right now. What we know from the, at least surveys in the lockdown period is that families have encountered tremendous losses of incomes, and in particular, and then these losses affect a lot of things about how they can operate to live in ways that preserve or really sort of improve pre-pandemic patterns of living, right? And so we don't know enough about whether the social protection programs are actually closing those gaps for families. And then last but not least, and I study sort of large-scale programs a lot, and so I say this with sort of really with a lot of data, but a call to all of us to say, we have to take a look now at how can social protection programs themselves, in the ways that they are implemented, not become a burden for already stressed families. So the programs have to be designed and implemented in ways that make it easier for families to access benefits by removing administrative bottlenecks, paperwork, and stigma. And in fact, data and concurrent monitoring can really help us to identify these kinds of issues as well. So how can we resolve some of these bottlenecks? Of course, I say this as a researcher, but investing in data systems, not just in sort of big impact evaluations, but sort of data and knowledge systems that move fast along with the evolution in these programs is going to be really critical to help us, resolve the bottlenecks and make sure these programs work for the families they should work for. So this is a fast-moving pandemic. The economic and the other policy actions have been fast-moving and fast-evolving too. And a big question for me is, can we make our data systems and the systems that connect data to action also fast-moving and fast-evolving to understand how well the solutions are working so that we can be nimble and well-organized. So in closing, I want to bring us back to the story of the Dutch famine of 1944-1945. If today we don't apply what we know from the biology of how hunger and food insecurity affect human bodies and brains, if we don't apply what we know from economics and from nutrition about the short and long-term benefits of this investments, and as human beings, if we don't apply what we know is right from the standpoint of ethics and human rights, we would simply be failing generations. I don't think we want to be known as people who are failing generations. I believe that data and evidence and people who connect the dots between data, evidence, and action have an important role to play here in terms of watching and keeping an eye on what's happening and helping governments and other people sort of do the right thing for the most vulnerable. So I think we have to really connect the dots on these here and bring our science and our intent together with the best of humanity. Really, I want to see a strong resolve, not just to implement programs, but to learn as we move so that we are adapting and evolving fast. So I'll stop there, and we can come back and maybe answer some questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Menon. There already is a question on nutrition and achieving better nutrition outcomes in the chat, and I'm sure we'll come back to you and others on that, and hopefully some other questions as well. Just a reminder, please, as we go, do put in your questions in the chat. This is a great opportunity from some really world-class minds and leading thinkers on this topic. Let's not miss it. So don't be shy. So I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Sanya Nishtar. And Dr. Nishtar is a federal minister and special assistant to Pakistan's Prime Minister on poverty alleviation and social protection. She is the founder of government's flagship social protection program, EHSAS, and she also chairs the Benazir Income Support Program, BISP, and Government's Council on Poverty Alleviation. And Dr. Nishtar is further a member of the United Nations Global Alliance on Poverty Eradication. Dr. Nishtar, we have her joining through a recorded video message. It's really a pleasure to hear from you, and over to my colleagues, please, to cue that video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by congratulating socialprotection.org on its 5th anniversary. And I would like to thank the governments of Australia and Germany for extending support to this important initiative over the years. I would also like to thank the co-sponsors of this meeting for highlighting the importance of social protection in the COVID context and the unrecognized potential of social protection as a lever to advance food security and nutrition objectives. I can tell you with practical, on-ground, recent COVID-related experience that social protection is an underappreciated policy opportunity in the food security, food systems and nutrition context. And I strongly feel that we must appreciate its potential, institutionalize it, and use it for interventions at scale, because it can be a very powerful tool in the quest for building back better post-COVID. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, from where I stand, I can tell you that COVID-19 pushed many developing country governments into a very narrow policy-making alley. For countries like mine, where 24 million breadwinners subsist on daily or piece rate wages, the lockdown wasn't just catastrophic for livelihoods. It created serious food security issues. Hunger was looming large, and 2 weeks into the lockdown, we were close to civil unrest and rioting on the streets due to disruptions in daily wage remuneration and its implications. Yesterday, at another session in this conference, I talked about the $1.25 billion emergency cash package that government of Pakistan set up, and the manner in which it was crucial in alleviating the suffering of 15 million families, each of which received $75 for emergency subsistence as our country went into lockdown. Stewarding this end-to-end digitally delivered program and delivering cash to half the population of this 5th most populous country of the world was one of the profoundest experiences of my career, and the most humbling too. I traveled extensively to monitor operations, and wherever I went, I interacted with those who had queued up to receive assistance. So invariably, I used to ask people how they would use the money, and inevitably the answer would be that they would use it to put food on the table or to buy rations. This was also evidenced in the results of a recent telephonic interview, which showed that 93% of the people used Asas emergency cash for food items. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you are probably aware, our country did very well both on the health as well as the social protection fronts during the first wave of COVID-19. The government tried its utmost to keep the food supply chains open even as transport was interrupted. And the Prime Minister himself chaired sessions to ensure that supply and demand disruptions didn't spiral out of control. But with livelihoods decimated, financial access to rations did become a problem. And the solution to that, at a very large scale, was provided through social protection, through Asas emergency cash. So I can tell you with conviction that during this pandemic, I saw social protection as the most important tool of food security in a crisis situation. We are in fact going one step beyond and are using this crisis as an opportunity to roll out a planned health and nutrition conditional cash transfer program, which makes specialized nutrition food available to pregnant and lactating mothers and their children to prevent stunting. As you all know, stunting in children is a very important policy goal in today's world, where people are the currency of progress, where levels of human capital development will determine the extent to which countries can progress in this digital age. And even though approaches to stunting prevention are deeply intersectoral, social protection has the lever to jumpstart hurdles. We are practically putting measures in place in Pakistan to demonstrate that. I would also like to reiterate that it is not only at the undernutrition end of the spectrum that we must focus, because this pandemic has shown the interactions between deprivation, poverty, obesity, and other malnutrition-fueled non-communicable diseases, and the risk of succumbing to COVID-19 as a result of those risks. So there's need for synergy across policies and programs with regard to social protection and nutrition. And this pandemic has in fact shown that it is possible to place food security and nutrition at the heart of social protection objectives. It has shown us that there is a need to do so, and it has demonstrated that it is entirely possible to create a synergy. We now need to scale up its institutionalization. I thank you once again for lending impetus to such an important discussion and hope this will be the beginning of a paradigm change. I thank you.
Thank you. Fabulous, fabulous interventions. We are now coming to our last, but definitely not least intervention. And I'd like to introduce, I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Gerda Verburg, who's the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, the SUN movement, since 2016. And prior to her appointment to SUN, Ms. Verburg served as the chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Food and Nutrition Security and of the UN Committee on World Food Security. Ms. Verburg, it is always a pleasure to hear your thoughts. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much for having
me. You're on mute though.
Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to start with thanking the organizers, WFP, Pakistan, FAO, and NEPAD, together with some other organizations, a very important issue. And I like to focus a little bit on the how, a little bit more, because we have heard already a lot about the what. And I will build the how on the experiences of the 62 member countries of the SUN movement in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And several of our member countries are in this event. And WFP and GAIN and FAO are esteemed partners of the SUN movement. And I would like to focus on the issue of social protection, food and nutrition security, and include water and sanitation. And I'm extremely happy to that it was done already by other panelists, because you need to build here the people's agenda, including, of course, health, but health from the very beginning has received the attention in the emergency, but also bringing in education, which is complex, and that was brought forward. So what is the big lesson that we have to learn here? That it is time for systems change. And what does it mean, systems change? Because it is easy to talk about, but a system in a country will only change if the government is ready to take ownership. So what we have learned is that improving nutrition in the SUN experience is a matter of political will and political leadership. And the same counts for the whole humans agenda, the whole people's agenda. Improving the system is a matter of political will. And having said this, the question is, what will the partners do? The UN, the development partners, private sector, civil society. They need to be ready to align amongst themselves and align behind the government, steering and guiding or supporting or even challenging the government to go into the right direction. So people are the currency of progress in.
Gerda, your mic has gone off again. It's just muted. Can you unmute yourself?
All right. Okay. Okay. Talking about the people's agenda, it is important to realize already a very strong political message that people are the currency of progress of a country, and that it is human capital and people who are determining the success of nation states and of countries. This is a strong message that we need to learn. The question is how. And I think that if we think about governments, we need to start thinking about leadership and not about power. Leadership of the future, of today and the future, needs to be ready to serve society and to invest in people in order to build the future. So what can we learn from some movement countries is that when a government is renewed, that the president and the prime minister need to think very keen about the key performance indicators for ministers. Don't give them only a profile or an agenda for their own part, for their own department, but also give them a performance indicator on collaboration. Because to address the issues at stake today and in the whole COVID crisis, departments need to really work together in a multi-sectoral way, supported by the different stakeholders. Key performance indicators at the start of the government shouldn't only be focused on economic development and on, for instance, in agriculture, on crop production and yield increasement. It should focus on quality and investing in people. So how to get there? I think it is important to then think back, what can people do in elections? Not only in the national election, but also in the regional and in community election. Because we want to see that the policy and the legislation at country level will change into a systemic approach, investing in people, but where we want to see the action is at community level. Owned by the community, the ability to take their own fate and future in their own hands, and to be able and supported to develop their own dignity and prosperity. Community action, country legislation, and country policy, and involvement, of course, as was said, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Planning, because national budgets are requested to really bring that change in communities. What has the government to do, or what can development partners do to support the countries? Please stop thinking in projects and programs, because projects have a beginning and an end. They will stop at a certain moment, and then the question is, what has changed for the people who were involved in it? When the money is gone and the evaluation is done, what will stay? And very often we see that people are back to where they were, and they are even more vulnerable because they know how it was to be part and parcel of the program. I think the government also should work with all the partners, the stakeholders, to get the data right, to get monitoring right, and to agree upon priorities that can be set. Laurent Sadat was mentioning the example of Ethiopia, the return on investment, and together you're able to do this and to make progress. For development partners, it is important to be ready to leave your egos and your logos at the door and build partnership, be ready to collaborate together, and focus on working together to make it happen, to not be all in the same country or not to be all in the same community or region, but to share and focus on creating results that are systemic. So how to get out of this COVID crisis? And again, it's learning from our countries. First of all, it is important to have the emergency ready. And every emergency pack should include social protection, should include food and nutrition, should include water and sanitation, and could it be also education, because then you don't hamper the future perspective of young people. And as said, very often school meals are very helpful. This, of course, starts also with the crisis preparedness. Is a government really ready to very rapidly adapt or even have an early warning, early action system? And I think there the UN can play an important role by bridging the gap between humanitarian and development and making sure that the seeds of the development are already planted in the humanitarian phase, so that the first harvest of building a stronger future, building forward better, as was said, is already there, and people can continue to build on it. I see you appearing. I have two more messages to share. One of the fundamentals in preventing the next crisis or being ready for the next crisis is getting the fundamentals right of gender equality. The position of women is very often at stake, and get it right, because in most of the countries, women, when it comes to equal rights, are not really recognized by law or by culture or both. And finally, involve youth, because youth are the decision makers of the future, and their creativity and their readiness to embrace complexity and come forward with creative and innovative approaches is amazing. And I think in every decision-making room, we should have young people represented, because now many of them are complaining that their future is more dire than before, and that they will pay the depth of this crisis, but they should be encouraged to become part of the solution and get a full-fledged opportunity to do this. Finally, you need to build somewhere towards, and I would like to invite the people in this panel, but also the organizers, please take strong commitments how to build forward better and stronger in a systemic way, how to build the people's agenda to bring it forward in strong commitments in the Food Systems Summit hosted by the Secretary General of the UN next year, and in the Nutrition for Growth Summit next year, December, in Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass over in a moment to Lola, who is going to have the difficult task of trying to summarize in a few minutes some of the major points that have come out today. And before I do that, I just want to say that all the videos of these magnificent speakers are being uploaded as we speak to the blog. So you can refer to them after this, and we really do hope that this is the beginning of a sustained and high quality conversation. Over to you, Lola.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. And indeed, I have almost the impossible task of summarize this very, very rich participation, but let me try and attempt it rapidly. Maybe to put some top lines and then some points inside. I think the event has shown that COVID-19 has only exacerbated many of the roadblocks that already existed, and some of them has been mentioned by the panelists. Problems with critical functions in social protection systems, such as weak integration across programs or lack of a strong beneficiary data management, have hampered the ability to identify and reach those who needed assistance. We heard that, for example, in the difficulties to target in urban and peri-urban areas from Malawi, Ethiopia, and others. The pandemic has highlighted many of the challenges as well in our food systems, as we heard. The cost of healthy diets and access to diverse food, which are already key challenges to addressing malnutrition, became more expensive, and access became limited as COVID-19 ravaged economies and supply chains were disrupted. And we heard the need to include fortification, the need to include non-staples in these packages. We have also heard the challenge of the transfer value adequacy, as transfer values need to be adjusted, in fact, to provide adequate food security and nutrition, because sometimes the transfer values are for specific groups, and this was different, and we saw how food security and nutrition adjustment were necessary to give everybody an opportunity and adequate diets. Let me go for the second big topic that we found, and is that the COVID-19 has led to a rapid, large-scale increase in food insecurity. That is, in fact, a call to action to make social protection work better for everyone in society, and not just the poorest. And we saw clearly that there was a rapid increase in vulnerability and food insecurity of low and middle income households. We heard from the three countries, Malawi, Ethiopia, and Pakistan, that this happened. And also we saw that it was not only the regular low and middle income household, but also returning migrants that had really serious problems. And they had, these groups are regularly excluded from the regular social protection systems, and we have to adjust and include this type of groups in our social protection systems. We heard from the panelists. Also, what did we hear as well? It seems that we really have to continue to build social protection systems that recognize the linkages between food security and other areas of human development. Basically, multisectoriality, everybody almost mentioned that. And I think that comes from all the lessons that we have learned over the years. Somebody said that poverty and hunger are complex social problems, that require multisectoral and multi-stakeholder coalitions. Coordination coalitions came in different panelists. And as many countries are building and trying to improve cohesion of social protection system to better coordinate social assistance, insurance, social care, and labor market interventions. That was clear from the panelists, from the governments that presented. But also was very clear from others that we have also continued to learn about the multidimensional nature of food insecurity and how to integrate food security and nutrition into policy and programs. We heard now from Gerda, health, education, water and sanitation, labor, agriculture, integration. Let me continue to more. We also see as big topic that we continue to see a need for a stronger government, regional, and international financing mechanism, sustainability, basically. For developed and developing countries alike, we have seen that government spending on social protection is often below what is needed to ensure access to basic needs and services. And COVID has proven that governments and international actors can allocate sufficient resources to better meet social protection needs if they have the willpower and, of course, the ability to raise those resources. We have seen this huge scale up of social protection, especially the urban and peri-urban, that has been never seen before, as we heard. And then let me end with maybe the question. What is the question that remains? Yeah, and is that, can we ensure that the improvements in national social protection system that we have seen over the last month and the rapid actions that we have seen in the last month will be institutionalized, and as a result, giving a long-term and a sustainable approach. And it's very clear that the COVID has given a short-term impetus, but now we need to engage and make this sustainable and ensure that it includes the food security and nutrition recommendations that were given by the panelists. I want to finish also quoting maybe two of our panelists and saying very clear, we need to build forward better, as Lauren said, and we need to keep up the people's agenda, as Gerda said. But basically outstanding, there is so many more things we could continue saying, but let me leave it there and so we can have a dialogue. Thank you very much, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Lola. You attempted the impossible. That's why I asked you to do it. That was great. Okay, we have 10 minutes, which of course is totally inadequate time to hear from people, but to hear from these speakers, and we wish we had more. But I'm going to nonetheless pick a few of the questions that have come and ask specific speakers to respond to them as briefly as you could. One question has come up on financing. We recognize global problems are huge and social protection can be very effective in addressing these global problems. What are some of the best lessons worldwide on financing social protection coverage beyond the support that international donors can provide? I'd like to ask, invite Ethiopia, Dr. Tesfaye, perhaps to have a quick reflection on that. If you're still there and can hear me. And in the meantime, there was another question on, are there social protection measures that specifically combine health insurance and social assistance to achieve better nutrition outcomes? I was going to ask Dr. Menon to respond to that one. If either of you can come off mute, that would be, you can go ahead. Would you like me to repeat it? Come off mute, please. Over to you.
Sorry, I was going to just ask if you could repeat that or point me to where the question is.
Sorry for that. The question was, are there instances where health insurance and social assistance have been specifically combined and effective for better nutrition outcomes? If you haven't come across such instances, I'll pass over to Dr. Haddad. Thank you.
I don't think health insurance, but I think
and the first
cash
question.
transfers, yes. So I think maybe Professor Richard wants to come in, but I don't think health insurance, but we have seen work from some of the regression decomposition type of analyses we've been doing in India, that the expansion of health insurance along with a range of other programs has contributed to stunting declines, but they haven't been sort of tailored to answer questions around specific health insurance programs, etc. So no, nothing that I'm aware of on health insurance per se. Thanks.
Professor Mkandawire, did you want to come in?
No, and I wanted to come in on the first question. I hope I understood that clearly. I think it relates it to financing.
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
No, I think a key message that seems to be emerging, perhaps is a little blurred, is around, I think the message which we should say, I mean, to all of us, that I think we need to move away from the myth that WFP is there to hand out relief through these social protection interventions. And I think instead, I think, let us, I think, advance, social protection as a means for creating resilient local communities and building a basis for wealth creation by these communities. Hence, what we need probably in the conversation going forward is the need for introducing more innovative social protection interventions that demonstrate the value addition to national development processes. And I think this would include, rightly so, I think, ways and means of bringing on board the private sector, who might see their participation as a business proposition in social protection measures at the country level. But also, how do we make sure that those communities into social protection see their participation in those interventions as a way of, creating worth for themselves. And I think, rightly so, some of the programs around smart agriculture, including agroforestry interventions, are very amenable to, generating, I think, opportunities for businesses and wealth creation. So I'm saying that I think we need to be a little more innovative and move away from this perception that, social protection as advanced by WFP is around just, protecting the poor and then they remain poor, but they move away from poverty to wealth creation for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent points. Let me see. A number of questions have had some answers there, and I would remind you, if we don't manage to answer your question as directly as you would like here in the conference, we will be sharing some written answers subsequently. Here's a question. Again, I was going to ask you, Professor Mkandawire, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Tay, but I understand she may have had to drop off early. So I'd like to ask you and Ms. Verberg this question. What is one thing that partner agencies could do differently to support you, to support better? Maybe we'll go to Ms. Verberg first.
Thank you. I think there are three things that they could do. First of all is, as I said in my contribution, be ready to align behind a government or to support a government, push the government to take the lead, because in the end, that is the responsible level, and the politicians have to be elected and have to be accountable to the countries. Secondly, be ready to work amongst your colleagues and align with them, meaning that you do not drive the priorities from your headquarters only, and do not think only in projects and programs, because then you have a siloed approach and they have a beginning and an end, and it's not bringing systemic change. Thirdly, I think development partners and the whole global society should start thinking not in global solutions anymore, which is still happening, but they should ask themselves the question, where do we put our logos and our egos in order to be able to stand next to what is happening in countries and to support countries to really make the progress they need to make, but also at the same time hold them to account, and meaning that they can also support to make sure that data systems, monitoring systems are in place and are aligned, avoiding a data system confusion that is happening in so many countries right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Very briefly, Professor, if you would like to come in, and then I'll move on to two further questions for the other panelists. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think just 3 points. I mean, one, I think it is critical that as governments look at long-term planning, that they take into account the need for inserting in those plans social protection interventions. I think that's very fundamental. But secondly, I think we heard already that data is very important, and therefore data gathering that begins to assist in targeting, and ensuring that there's accountability of the resources that go into social protection is important. But more fundamentally, also, I think any evidence that can be generated that shows the value proposition of social protection interventions at the country level, so that governments realize that this is actually an intervention that they need to invest in, instead of actually looking at it as an external intervention that will come from relief agencies like WFP. So we need, I think, to demonstrate more and more the value of social protection interventions for national development processes.
May I interrupt here a little bit, because I do not fully agree with you. I think that there are still too many governments who leave the people's agenda to the development partners. And if there is a need or there is a crisis, they call upon development partners, and they prioritize investment in infrastructure or in economic development, their budget. So I think a critical conversation needs to take place here.
Thank you. And I'm going to move on. The organizers have just advised us that we can have 10 additional minutes, but no more. So I'm going to take advantage of that in order to ask Dr. Sampson and Dr. Haddad each a question, and then we will close. And Dr. Sampson, the question I'd like to ask you, it's in the chat. It's about the question of adequacy as opposed to coverage. Are we paying enough attention to adequacy? And how can we improve the evidence around questions of adequacy, particularly when we start thinking about the challenges that we face, and in some cases the debates in trying to align routine social protection with emergency responses. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Over to you, please, if you've heard the question. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Michael.
Oh, hey, yes, I'm sorry. I just had a blip. Could you repeat the question?
Sorry, the question is about the question, are we paying enough attention to the issue of adequacy? And specifically, we're often faced with the challenge, and in many cases, there can even be a debate about how to align routine social protection and emergency responses or humanitarian responses to shocks. And are we paying enough attention to adequacy, and how can we improve the evidence around questions of adequacy?
I think that's a really important question, and it's been a long debate in social protection. There's a critical trade-off between adequacy and coverage, and that is a more pressing trade-off now than ever, given the budget constraints. My view is it's almost always better to get broader coverage, even if that means sacrificing adequacy in order to begin a process of progressive realization of more expansive coverage and then eventually more generous benefits. But the need for synergy to generate impact for nutrition makes me pause, because even if the adequacy of the core benefit, the cash or the food, is limited to get broader coverage, you still need all the other complementary interventions. And unless you deliver those, you might not get to, in particular, the nutritional impact, which is so vital.
Thank you. I had a final question for Dr. Haddad, and then we're going to wrap up, but unfortunately he had to drop off right at noon, so that was the big disadvantage for going over time. So I'm going to launch the question to any panelist willing to take it up, and it's simply this. There's a quotation that we often hear in talking about sort of the COVID-19 challenge that has been posed for all of us, and the what next, and that quotation is about not wasting a good crisis. Now, no one would call this a good crisis, but we can't argue with the fact that it certainly is a crisis. And do you think, is there meaning behind this? Is this something we like to say to reassure ourselves, or are there some specific ways in which we can take the momentum that is there around social protection right now and sustain it, even once, hopefully, COVID very soon is no more such a part of our daily lives? So I'm going to probably be able to take 2 or at most 3 very quick thoughts on that, and I'll go with whoever comes in first and second, please.
Okay, can I?
If you allow me to start here, we have worked with our 62 member countries to develop situation papers. What is going well, what is going wrong in the hot crisis of COVID? And we have documented this. This is also the agenda of the broken system, because the system is vulnerable to all this disruption: food, health, nutrition, social protection, etc. And then you can start to think about recovery and to build forward better. And it's not a nice saying, never spoil a good crisis, but in this particular thing, there was no country accepted. Every country has to learn its lessons. And it is clear that countries need to be in the lead themselves, because the rich people cannot escape to London or Paris, etc., and then come back after the crisis. So they need to be included and involved in the building forward better, and they should be held to account to contribute to the systemic renewed approach. Thanks.
Thank you. Michael, I think you wanted to come in.
Sure. Crises interact with social norms to worsen both economic and gender inequality. And through this, they tend to reinforce those adverse social norms. Social protection has the capacity to redirect the power of this crisis, to change those social norms. Nothing changes social norms more than a crisis. Now, it's a long story. to talk about how, but that's another discussion. How do we use comprehensive social protection to channel the power of the crisis in changing incentives for both policymakers and society to begin to change these social norms to improve gender and economic equality?
Thank you. Dr. Menon, please, and then I'll close. Thank
Sure.
you.
So in terms of, in a sense, this becoming an opportunity, I think for a very long time now, those of us who work in nutrition have recognized that poverty and food insecurity are really deep underlying drivers of the malnutrition crisis. But the responses to the malnutrition that one has seen in many countries has been primarily to focus on sort of core nutrition programs and health systems responses. So in a sense, what we have here in the context of the crisis or the pandemic is the ability to remind people again about how important those underlying social and economic drivers are, and how we have tools in hand, such as the social protection programs that many countries have, but we haven't necessarily connected dots enough to protect nutrition for vulnerable families. So, in that sense, I think, I guess it's an opportunity. It's a terrible way and a terrible time to have to, to do that. But we have to remind each other how important protecting sort of the basics is in these times. It always is, but a crisis reminds us how important it really, it is in these times. So, I hope we can move forward with a continued resolve to continue to connect the dots so that families are really protected economically, whether in times of crisis or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been, I'm going to wrap up. It's been a huge honor for WFP to convene this panel with all of you. Thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, and your contributions. WFP is committed absolutely to contributing deliberately and systematically to collective efforts, what need to be collective efforts to address these huge, complex, and interrelated global problems and achieve long-term national goals. And one way we're hoping to contribute to this, along with many other partners, is by convening this kind of conversation that really is a step in trying to do what you, Dr. Menon, were talking about in your intervention, linking evidence and policy and practice. So we hope and expect that this is the beginning of a longer and broader conversation today. And I will just remind you that the blog is there to continue this conversation, and some of our panelists who had to drop out we can prevail upon them to drop back in again in the context of the blog. So that's somewhere where you can use as a reference and to ask questions or follow up on issues that have piqued your interest here today. So a huge thank you to all of you. Lola Castro, would you like to say anything as we close? No, we're okay. Thanks. It was a pleasure to co-host with you, and we'll be in touch again in the lead up to as we approach World Food Day. Thank you.
Thank you to all. Bye.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.